There's a six-stage cycle that destroyed Germany's economy in the 1920s. And right now, in 2025, the United States is at stage 4. This isn't a theory. It's not speculation about what might happen. The 6 stages are these: war debt explosion, the first print, currency confidence cracks, hyperinflation spiral, economic implosion, and social disintegration. Each stage makes the next stage inevitable. Each stage happened to Germany in sequence, and each stage is happening to the United States in sequence. But before we map this to America, you need to understand how this actually played out in Germany. Stage by stage. Decision by decision. Because the pattern doesn't care about good intentions. It only cares about mathematics. Stage 1 began in 1914, not 1923. Germany's collapse didn't start with wheelbarrows of cash. It started with a decision every government facing war makes. How do we pay for this? When World War I erupted, Germany's leaders faced a choice. Raise taxes immediately and risk domestic opposition, or finance the war through bonds and borrowing, betting that victory would cover the costs. They chose debt. Over 4 years, Germany spent 170 billion marks on the war, not through taxation, through bonds sold to citizens and loans from banks, backed by a printing press that ran faster each year. The German government believed the pattern that has seduced every empire in history. Triumph would balance the ledger. The war ended in 1918. Germany lost. The debt remained, and the Treaty of Versailles added 132 billion gold marks in reparations on top of the existing 170 billion in war debt. Stage 1 complete, a mountain of obligations with no clear way to pay. Stage 2 began immediately. The new Weimar government faced the same choice Germany's imperial government had faced in 1914, but now without the excuse of war. Raise taxes dramatically to service debt and reparations, or print money to cover obligations and hope something changes. Raising taxes meant political suicide. The population had already sacrificed everything for 4 years of war. Printing money meant delayed consequences, problems pushed into an uncertain future. Every government chooses the future crisis over the present one. Between 1918 and 1921, Germany increased its money supply fourfold. 4 times as many marks, chasing roughly the same amount of goods and services. Prices rose 50% in 3 years. Economists called it inflation. Politicians called it temporary. The German people called it manageable. Everyone pretended the mathematics would somehow resolve themselves. They wouldn't. Stage 3 arrived in 1921, and this is where currency collapse becomes inevitable. Foreign holders of German marks began to notice the pattern. The German government wasn't reducing debt. It was inflating it away. International confidence cracked. Holders of marks sold them for francs, for pounds, for dollars, for anything that wasn't being systematically debased. The exchange rate collapsed. In January 1921, 4 marks bought $1. By December 1922, 320 marks bought $1. Not a gradual slide, a free fall. And here's what people outside Germany don't understand about currency collapse. It doesn't stay outside. Germany imported 1/3 of its food. When the mark collapsed on international markets, import prices exploded overnight. A German merchant buying wheat from America suddenly paid 80 times more in marks for the same wheat. Those costs got passed to consumers immediately. Domestic prices rose to match import prices. Workers demanded higher wages to afford food. Businesses raised prices to cover higher wages. The cycle had begun, and cycles don't stop on their own. Stage 4 arrived in 1922, and this is where mathematics replaced policy. The cycle that began in Stage 3 became self-perpetuating. The government needed marks to pay reparations and debt. The mark was collapsing, so they needed More marks to buy the same amount of gold or foreign currency. Printing accelerated. Between January 1922 and November 1923, Germany's money supply increased 1 billion times. Not 100 times. Not 1 million times. 1 billion times. At the peak in November 1923, prices doubled every 3.7 days. Think about what that means in practice. If bread cost 1 million marks on Monday, it cost 2 million marks on Thursday, 4 million marks on Sunday, 8 million marks the following Wednesday. Workers didn't receive weekly wages anymore. They received wages twice per day, at lunch and at closing, because waiting until evening meant a 10% loss in purchasing power. Wives met husbands at factory gates with wheelbarrows, shopping bags, suitcases, anything that could carry the bricks of currency needed to buy food before the 4 p.m. price increase. Restaurants didn't print menus. They wrote prices on chalkboards and updated them between lunch and dinner service. Postage for a letter cost 100 marks in January 1923, 10,000 marks in July, and 100 billion marks in November. This is what happens when Stage 4 begins. The mathematics take over. Human decisions become irrelevant. Stage 5 followed immediately, because Stage 4 destroys the mechanism that makes economies function. By late 1923, the German economy had stopped operating as an economy. Money ceased to be a store of value, ceased to be a medium of exchange, ceased to be anything except paper. Farmers refused to sell food for marks. They demanded payment in dollars, in Swiss francs, in gold, in anything real. Cities faced starvation, not because food didn't exist, but because the currency used to buy it had become meaningless. Barter replaced monetary exchange. A baker traded bread directly for shoes. A carpenter traded furniture for medical care. Industrial production collapsed by 50% because factories couldn't buy raw materials with worthless currency and couldn't pay workers with worthless wages. Unemployment exploded to 30%. Savings evaporated completely. Every bond purchased during the war, every pension earned over a lifetime of work, every insurance policy bought to protect a family, all of it became worth less than the paper it was printed on. The German middle class, the engineers and teachers and civil servants who had built an industrial empire, watched their entire lives reduced to nothing in 18 months. Foreign currency became the only real money. A single US dollar could buy a city block of real estate in Berlin. Germany still existed on a map. The government still functioned. People still went to work. But the Germany of 1914, the Germany that had competed with Britain for global power, had ceased to exist. Not conquered by an army. Not destroyed by invasion. Destroyed by the six-stage cycle playing out to its mathematical conclusion. Stage 6 took longer to materialize, but it was inevitable from the moment Stage 5 completed. The social contract of any nation rests on a simple promise. If you work, if you save, if you play by the rules, you build security. Hyperinflation destroys that promise completely. The people who saved were destroyed. The people who borrowed were rewarded. Debtors paid back loans with worthless currency. Savers watched lifetimes of discipline evaporate. Work became pointless when this month's wages bought nothing next month. The political center collapsed because the center had promised stability, and stability had become a lie written in worthless marks. Extremism filled the vacuum. Communist uprisings in 1923 tried to seize power by force. The Nazi Party, barely known before the collapse, launched the Beer Hall Putsch in November 1923, attempting to overthrow the government in Munich. Both failed that year, but the seed was planted. When the Weimar Republic asked Germans to believe in democracy, Germans remembered that democracy had given them wheelbarrows of worthless paper, while the people who caused the crisis faced no consequences. 10 years later, in January 1933, Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany, not despite the hyperinflation, because of it. The line from currency collapse to political disintegration isn't correlation. It's causation, not gradual decay over generations. Direct causation across one decade. 6 stages. 4 years from the first signs of inflation in 1919 to complete monetary collapse in 1923. 10 more years to the death of democratic governance. Germany went from industrial superpower to economic wasteland to fascist state following this exact sequence, decision by decision, stage by stage. And here's what should terrify you. This pattern isn't unique to Germany. It's not about German culture or Weimar politics or the Treaty of Versailles specifically. It's about mathematics. And those same mathematics are playing out right now in the United States. The pattern that destroyed Germany isn't German. It's mathematical. And mathematics doesn't care about nations or good intentions or exceptional circumstances. What happened to the Weimar Republic has happened before and since, across different continents, different governments, different centuries. The sequence remains identical. France discovered this in the 1790s when the revolutionary government issued assignats, paper currency backed by confiscated church lands. The assignats were supposed to be different, backed by real assets, controlled by rational Enlightenment minds. Within 4 years, prices increased 400%. By 1796, the assignat was worthless. Hungary discovered it in 1946 when the pengo became the worst hyperinflation in recorded history. Prices doubled every 15 hours. Not 15 days. 15 hours. Zimbabwe discovered it in 2008 when the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe printed $100 trillion notes that couldn't buy a loaf of bread. Venezuela discovered it between 2016 and 2019 when inflation exceeded 1,000,000%. And the Bolivar joined the graveyard of dead currencies. Different governments, different political systems, different economic theories. Same 6 stages. Same mathematical sequence. Same outcome. Why does every government make the same choice? Because the alternative is political suicide. When debt becomes unmanageable, leaders face 2 options. Option 1. Raise taxes dramatically and cut spending severely, creating immediate pain for voters who will remove you from office. Option 2. Print money to cover obligations, creating delayed pain that might arrive after the next election, might be blamed on external factors, might somehow resolve itself through growth or inflation or miracles. Every government chooses the future crisis over the present crisis. Every single one. The German government in 1918 wasn't uniquely foolish. They were typically human, and the mathematics don't care about human nature. They care about supply and demand, about currency velocity, about feedback loops that become self-reinforcing once they begin. This is the critical insight. Once you reach stage 4, once the hyperinflation spiral starts, it's not a policy choice anymore. It's mathematics in motion. Germany couldn't stop printing because stopping meant immediate default, and default meant political collapse. So they printed more, which caused more inflation, which required more printing. The cycle feeds itself. Each rotation makes the next rotation larger. Venezuela couldn't stop it. Zimbabwe couldn't stop it. The Weimar Republic couldn't stop it. Not because they lacked intelligence or will, but because by the time stage 4 arrives, the equation has too much momentum. The variables are locked in. The outcome becomes inevitable unless something external breaks the cycle. So where's the United States in this sequence right now in 2025? Let me show you stage by stage. And what should keep you awake at night is this. We're not at stage 1 anymore. We're not at stage 2. We're deep into stage 3, and the mathematical indicators of stage 4 are beginning to flash red. Stage 1 began for the United States, not in 2220, but decades earlier. After September 11th, 2001, America launched wars in Afghanistan and Iraq that would eventually consume $8 trillion. Not $8 billion, $8 trillion. The wars were financed almost entirely through debt, not taxation. The pattern Germany followed in 1914, betting that future victory or growth would balance present borrowing, played out again. Then came 2008 and the financial crisis. The government responded with more debt. Then 2020 and COVID-19. $5 trillion created in 2 years to cover shutdowns, stimulus payments, business loans, unemployment extensions. The federal debt now stands at $36 trillion, 120% of GDP. In 1980, that ratio was 30%. The mountain of obligations Germany faced in 1918 has a parallel today, just with more zeros and a longer time frame. Stage 1 complete. Check. Stage 2 happened in plain sight, just under a different name. After the 2008 financial crisis, the Federal Reserve launched quantitative easing. Not printing money, they said. Asset purchases. Liquidity provision. The terminology changed. The mathematics didn't. QE1 in 2008 created $1 trillion. QE2 and QE3 between 2010 and 2014 created another $3.5 trillion. Then 2020 arrived and subtlety vanished. $4 trillion printed in a single year. 20% of every dollar in existence created in 12 months. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet went from $900 billion in 2008 to $9 trillion by 2022, a tenfold increase in 14 years. Germany increased its money supply fourfold between 1918 and 1921 and called it temporary. America increased its money supply tenfold and called it quantitative easing. Different name, identical mathematics. Stage 2 complete. Check. Stage 3 is happening right now, and the signs are everywhere if you know where to look. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, are actively building payment systems that bypass the dollar. China and Saudi Arabia are negotiating oil contracts settled in yuan, not dollars. For 50 years, oil traded exclusively in dollars. That monopoly is cracking. Central banks worldwide are reducing dollar reserve holdings. In 2000, 72% of global reserves were held in dollars. Today, that number is 58% and falling. Central banks are buying gold at record rates, the highest purchases in 2022, 2023, and 2024 since tracking began. When central banks buy gold and build alternative payment systems, they're not making speeches about monetary policy. They're voting with actions. They see what's coming. They're preparing for it. The confidence crack that hit Germany in 1921 when foreign holders dumped marks is happening in slow motion to the dollar right now. Not panic selling yet. Strategic repositioning, which is exactly how Stage 3 begins. Not with sirens and headlines, but with quiet movements that signal the mathematics underneath have shifted. Stage 3 in progress. Check. Stage 4 is where mathematics replaces choice, and the early signs are undeniable. In 2021 and 2022, inflation hit 9% officially, the highest rate in 40 years. Real inflation in food, housing, and energy ran significantly higher than official numbers. They called it transitory. It wasn't. The Federal Reserve raised interest rates to fight inflation, pushing rates from near zero to over 5% in 18 months. But here's the mathematical trap. With $36 trillion in debt, every percentage point increase in rates adds hundreds of billions to annual interest costs. The United States now pays over $1 trillion per year just on interest, not paying down debt, just servicing it. The government faces the same impossible choice Germany faced in 1922. Keep rates high to fight inflation and watch interest costs explode, or lower rates and print more money to cover obligations, which feeds more inflation. Either path leads deeper into the cycle. Wages are chasing prices now. Workers demand raises to cover higher costs. Businesses raise prices to cover higher wages. The feedback loop is forming. We're watching the early stages of Stage 4 materialize in real time. Not hyperinflation yet. Not prices doubling every few days. But the mechanism that creates hyperinflation. The self-reinforcing cycle, where each round of printing requires more printing, is beginning to engage. Stage 4, beginning. Check. If the pattern continues, Stage 5 looks like this. Savings evaporate not through theft, but through mathematics. The dollars sitting in your retirement account, in your bank, in bonds and insurance policies, lose purchasing power faster than interest can replace it. The real economy stops, functioning normally. Shortages appear not because production ceased, but because producers refuse payment in a currency losing value by the day. The dollar loses reserve currency status completely as the final holdout nations abandon it for yuan, for euros, for anything with more stability than a printing press running at maximum speed. Assets flee into hard stores of value. Real estate prices explode as people convert cash into property. Commodities surge as dollars chase physical goods. Foreign currency becomes the actual medium of exchange for anyone who can access it. The middle class, the Americans who saved in 401ks and paid down mortgages and believed the system rewarded discipline, watches decades of work dissolve in months. Just like Germany in 1923. Just like Venezuela in 2018. This isn't speculation. This is what Stage 5 does. The pattern doesn't care about American exceptionalism. Stage 6 follows when the social contract shatters. When work can't build security, and savings become worthless, and the rules that promise stability reveal themselves as lies. Political extremism fills the vacuum. Germany took 10 years from currency collapse in 1923 to Hitler's rise in 1933. What does America's timeline look like? The pattern doesn't predict timing, but it does predict sequence. Democracy loses legitimacy when the system it produced destroys the people who trusted it most. Maybe we find a way out. Maybe we cut spending, raise taxes, restore fiscal discipline, do what Germany and France and Hungary and Zimbabwe and Venezuela couldn't. Maybe America breaks the pattern. But here's the mathematical problem. We're at Stage 4. Stage 4 is where the feedback loop begins, where each solution creates the problem it tried to solve, where printing more money to cover debt from printing money becomes the only option left. Germany couldn't stop it. Venezuela couldn't stop it. The question isn't whether the pattern exists. The question is whether we can break it before Stage 5 makes that choice for us. 6 stages. Germany completed all 6 in 4 years. The United States is at Stage 4 right now in 2025. The pattern is mathematical. The sequence is locked in unless something fundamental changes. And it's happening faster than anyone in power wants to admit. Because the next 18 months will determine which direction we go. And the clock is ticking.